2018 is going to be a boom year. I'm going to explain why in today's show. I'm also going to give you some interesting perspective in my mindset moment, and then Tom Corley and I discuss how to teach your children rich habits.
Are you interested in property investing, success or money? Well, you're in the right place. This is the Michael Yardney podcast, where each week you'll learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in 20 minutes or less. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, who has once again been voted Australia's leading property investment advisor. That's the fourth time he's won a similar award in the last 6 years.
Welcome to this week's show. Today I'm going to discuss why I think 2018 is going to be a boom year. And before you're worried about what I'm on, wait and hear what I've got to say. I'm also going to teach you some interesting perspectives in my mindset moment, and then I have a chat with my good friend Tom Corley, my co-author in the book Rich Habits, Poor Habits, where we teach you a bit about how to teach your children rich habits. Now, even if you're not a parent, you are a child, or you were a child at some stage, and these lessons are going to be very important for you. That's coming up in just a moment. Before we start, though, I want to remind you that once a year I go around Australia and do a series of one-day trainings. Remember, we've got no properties for sale, so the intention is to educate the attendees at my National Property Market and Economic Updates. I'm being joined this year by Dr. Andrew Wilson, Australia's leading independent property economist, Ken Race, and local property and finance experts. I'd love you to join me, and while attendance is $99, as a subscriber to my podcast, I've not done this before, I'm suggesting you join me as my guest. So if you put in the promotion code podcast at propertymarketupdate.com.au, you can join me as my guest. I'm going to Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane and Perth, propertymarketupdate.com.au, put in the coupon code podcast and join me as my guest. But now, let's get on with the show. Well, we're well into 2018 already, and lots of people are making predictions about what's going to happen in the property market and the economy this year. So here's one of my predictions. I guess the first prediction is that most predictions are going to be wrong. But if we get that out of the way, I'm going to predict that 2018 is going to be a boom year. But before you start wondering what I'm on, let me explain. I believe it's going to be a boom year for fright. The media's at it again, and there's no shortage of scary stuff. Things like the property boom is over, property values are going to crash, housing's unaffordable, more APRA regulations are going to come, there's an oversupply of apartments, it's the end of foreign investing, Kim Kardashian does it again. Look, if you look back, every year's a boom year for fright. As far back as I can remember, there have always been scary stories in the media. And looking back over the years, I've invested through many property slowdowns, stock market crashes, periods of high, in fact, double-digit interest rates, and periods when people thought housing was unaffordable and would never go up in value again. Yet despite all of this, the value of my properties keeps doubling, allowing me to refinance and buy even more properties. Like I said, there's always bad news in the media. I remember in the late 1980s, there was a cry saying, look, don't buy houses anymore. They can't go up. Your kids will never be able to afford them. Actually, it sounds similar to today, doesn't it? Then there were similar headlines in late 2003. Predictions of our property market collapsing in 2008 after the global financial crisis. And then, you may not remember it, but if you've been around a little while, back in 2010, the media predicted the end of the property boom once again because interest rates rose and the property market slowed down. But look what's happened in the last 8 years since then. Of course, there's always the regular parade of overseas gurus coming here explaining how our property market's significantly overvalued and it's a house of cards which is about to topple. There are always scary headlines about this grim future And they could have given me plenty of reasons not to invest in property. Look, I remember before global warming, there was an overpopulation crisis that was talked about by politicians, by environmentalists, by economists. They predicted massive food shortening, rioting in the street, rampant cannibalism, and impending collapse of society. Well, not really, but they really did say that we just couldn't cope on Earth with all the people we've got. In fact, I even remember a panic about global cooling before global warming. Of course, the media gets much more mileage out of this type of story. They find it hard to get readers' interest reporting on jobs creation, on infrastructure spending, on significant population growth, on the greatest number of investors in Australian real estate on record, on 26 years of continuous economic growth. They don't report on that because that's boring. But to be a successful property investor, you need to step back and take a big picture view and refuse to be scared by the next boogeyman that's going to jump out from the bushes behind you. The fact is, this week, somebody's getting married, somebody's looking forward to having a baby, somebody's getting promoted, somebody's getting transferred, somebody's getting divorced, and a lot of people are happening to get rich. And this year, our population growth is going to offer continued support to our property markets. UBS Bank suggested that when you add short-term arrivals of overseas students to our already high growth permanent resident growth, Australia's people growth, rather than population growth, because population measures permanent residents, but people growth measures these temporary students, our people growth is going to grow at around 3.5%, meaning over 850,000 more people are going to have to live somewhere in Australia. And those who can't afford to buy, and all these temporary residents, they're going to have to rent. This means the long-term fundamentals, in fact the medium-term fundamentals for our property markets are sound. And if you take a long-term perspective, you're going to be able to spot and act on the opportunities that are going to arise this year as many potential home buyers and investors get scared off in this boom year of fright. So I see 2018 as being a year of great opportunity for strategic property investors, a year of opportunity for those who are willing to and able to see the big picture. But remember, what you look for is what you see. If you look for bad news, you're going to find it. On the other hand, if you look for opportunities, you're going to find them too. And boy, are there opportunities out there at present. I know our buyers agent teams on the ground are excited by the opportunities of some great properties that they're able to find with less competition at the beginning of this year than there was last year. Over the last year, we saw decreasing affordability, APRA's macro-prudential controls and changing sentiment stalling the property boom. And so now we've moved to the next stage. We are now entering a buyer's market rather than the seller's market, where last year sellers could ask almost anything they wanted. But the funny thing is, the buyers don't tend to buy in a buyer's market. Of course, smart investors do, because they recognise the current market presents them with a smorgasbord of opportunities, and they step up and they take advantage of them. I found that when there's lots of bad news, people believe times are going to be tough forever. Just like when things are good, people forget all the bad times that ever existed, and they think the good times are going to remain forever. Of course, neither case is true. In fact, during booms, people are most confident when maybe they should be the least confident, as things can't continue to travel at the breakneck speeds at above average rates of growth. Similarly, during the market slowdowns, things eventually turn around. But ironically, people have the least confidence when it's more likely that things are going to be easier to buy properties and eventually improve. That is, at these sort of times. 2018, in my mind, is going to be a great opportunity to educate yourself and get set to take advantage of the opportunities this stage of the property cycle represents. Yeah, things have slowed down, but this is a normal part of the ups and downs of the property cycle. The good news is that this time round, the market slowdowns occurred at a time of lowish interest rates in a low interest rate environment. So we're not going to have the deep downturns that we used to have in previous property cycles, because people aren't going to have to suddenly sell up their homes, and mortgage rates aren't going to make them have mortgage stress. But as always, while some people worry about the bad news and sit on the sidelines, astute investors are going to set themselves up for the next stage of the property cycle by purchasing well-located residential real estate. So I see 2018 as a year of cautious optimism to buy the right properties, because some properties are still increasing in value, but how do you know which property to buy? How do you know where to look? How do you know where to research? Well, I'm going to share this each week in my Michael Yardney podcast, but I'm also going to do a series of seminars that I do once a year around Australia in the first quarter of the year in Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane and Perth. So why not go to propertymarketupdate.com.au, propertymarketupdate.com.au, and find out about where my seminars are and when I'm going to be in your hometown, because I'd love to catch up with you permanently for these one-day teaching events.
If you're looking to get started in property or to grow your existing portfolio, turn to someone you can trust for independent advice. The team at Metropole Property Strategists have been involved in over $2 billion worth of property transactions, creating wealth for their clients, and they can do the same for you. They don't sell property, so their advice is independent and unbiased. Metropole can devise a strategy, their buyer's agents will buy your property for you, or you could use their renovations team, property development or portfolio management services. Arrange a time for an obligation-free chat at metropole.com.au. Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
In my mindset message today, I want to try and put things into a bit of a perspective. So, when you think about it, what are the most important priorities for you today? What are you going to concentrate on and what are you going to ignore? Now, I'd like to have a bit of a chat for a moment about this because I want to put it in perspective. So imagine if you knew you had 25 years to live. How much time would you spend worrying about the gyrations of the property market or the daily ups and downs of the stock market? If you knew you had 20 years to live, how much time would you spend trying to time the property market or getting the economy right or thinking about all those other unpredictable and things that are completely out of your control? But what if you only had 15 years left to live? How much time would you spend trying to buy a specific property at the perfect price? But if you only had 10 years to live, how much time would you devote to comparing your monthly investment returns with the returns of others? Now, imagine if you only had 5 years to live. How much of it would be spent obsessing about the financial news or the unforeseeable impacts the economy and the world's going to have on your investment portfolio? If you only had 1 year to live, how upset would you be about the investments that you'd made that didn't pan out? Or the investments that you'd passed by and that worked on quite well, actually, without you? If you unfortunately only had 1 month to live, who would you spend those final days with? What activities would you pursue? Now, if you only had 5 days left to live, how much of that time would you spend trashing others on a website or attacking people on Twitter? If you only had 24 hours to live, what would you want the people who knew you to remember the most about you? Okay, so how much time do you think you have left? Take a guess. Okay, now let's assume you guessed right. Now what? What are you going to do with your day today now that we've put some perspective on how much time you've got? This week in my weekly Mindset Moment, I want to introduce again my good friend Tom Corley from the United States. Hello, Tom.
Hi, Michael. How are you?
Great, thank you, and welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast. And today I want to discuss the topic of will your child be rich or poor? You've done a lot of study on that, and you've learned that there are some poverty habits that parents teach their children. I think you've recognised that as a child we learn a lot by modelling people around us. So who is it that we learn these habits from?
Yeah, so for the most part, Brown University study, a famous one, found that by the age of 9, we learn most of our habits that we're going to have and carry into our adult lives. And where do they come from? They come from our parents, because we spend most of those young years with our parents. There's something called mirror neurons, which allow us to mirror our parents' behaviors, habits, and thinking and emotions. So these are things that you have no control over. You're going to emulate the habits of your parents. And sometimes if you emulate bad habits, which happens to a large segment of the population, it forces you into a situation where you're eking out a living. So what we're trying to do, Michael, here in this podcast is try and convey some information, some habits, that ideas, strategies that individuals, parents can share with their kids so that they're not going to eke out a living.
Well, in the show notes with this podcast, Tom, I'm going to include the statistics from your 5-year study on the daily habits that separate the wealthy and the poor, because they're the habits that we're wanting people to understand, to change their own habits, and also to educate their children. Tom, when people will look at this list, they're going to say, gee, you're telling me I've got to eat differently, you're telling me I've got to exercise differently, you've got to tell me I've got to monitor my children's viewing habits and reading habits. I can't do all that at once. What's your answer to that?
Well, the beauty of the rich habits, Michael, is that in order to transform your life, you only need one or two of them. The reading rich habit, for example, if your kids pick up that habit early in life, well, that's going to benefit them in their career because they're going to read, they're going to become voracious readers and learn everything about their industry and their career. If they adopt the exercise rich habit, that's going to help them grow their brains because oxygen helps grow the neurons. And so they're going to pick up some of these habits and take them with themselves into their adult lives and transform their futures, basically change their future.
I think one of the habits that you discuss is the concept that the wealthy believe they're responsible for their financial circumstances, while 82% of the poor believe they're victims and not responsible. Now, listeners to my podcast, if you go back to episode 1, I talk about the concept that you should be the pilot of your life, not the passenger. If you haven't listened to that, go back to iTunes or michaelyardneypodcast.com and listen to episode 1. That's so important, Tom, being responsible rather than being a victim.
Yeah, if you're not going to accept responsibility for your life, then you're not even going to become aware of the things that you're doing, the habits that you have that are causing all of these issues that you're having and causing you to struggle financially. So the whole purpose of this is really to bring awareness to what you're doing and then take responsibility. And once you do that, awareness, take responsibility, not only then can you make the changes that you need to make in order to transform your life.
Well, interestingly, Tom, I've read your comments saying that the wealth gap in this country, in Australia, or the United States, or in fact all these Western countries, isn't really an income inequality gap. It's a parent inequality gap. What do you mean by that?
Well, honestly, I've come to the conclusion that parents are really responsible for most of the poverty in the world. They're, let's say, the industrialized world, or however you want to define that. Parents are responsible because if they're not teaching their kids success habits or they're not being a success mentor to their kids, then their kids are on their own and they've got to figure it out for themselves. And that takes a lot of time. And plus you have to be success-minded to begin with, to even, create a change in your life. So if parents are not doing their job as success mentors, then this is just a generational cycle of poverty that's going to perpetuate itself from one generation to the next.
So put it simply, Tom, that's part of the reason the rich keep getting richer and the poor, well, they keep remaining where they are. And again, it's not a judge of people. It's not that we're saying one group's better than the other, but we know in today's world, most people want to move up and get a level of financial freedom. So is it too late? Is it too hard? Is this locked in, or can people change, Tom?
Oh, no. In fact, I had to respond to one of my fans who went to a seminar that had Warren Buffett talking about. He gave them misinformation. He said that, after the age of 40, you can't change your habits. And there's just so many studies and so much data that says he's just opposite of right, which we call wrong. You can change your habits anytime, even into your 80s. It really doesn't matter how old you are. You can change your habits throughout your life.
So I guess in summary today, Tom, you're saying that the best parents teach their children good habits that lead to success, while the average parent teaches their children bad habits that unfortunately lead to poverty. So, Tom, thank you very much, and I'd love to have you back in another podcast real soon.
Oh, I can't wait. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, there you have it, the end of another show. Thank you so much for listening. First of all, I explained a bit about why 2018 is going to be a boom year for fright. But I hope I also gave you some insights that if you understand what's really going on, you're not going to have to be concerned about it. In fact, you're going to be able to take advantage of the new normal. And we are in a new normal. The world of real estate is different. And that's one of the reasons I'm really suggesting you join me at my national property and economic market updates around Australia. Go to propertymarketupdate.com.au, and if you put in the coupon code podcast, you'll be able to come along as my guest. We also explained a bit about the importance of time perspective, and I had a fun chat with my good friend Tom Corley. Now, every week at this stage, I ask you to do me a favour in return, if you got some benefit from the show, to pass it on to somebody, to let somebody know. And if you could leave a review on iTunes, that really, really invigorates me. One recently came in from Molly Simic, and she said, "Fantastic podcast. I love Michael's mindset moments, and it's really started to change the way I think. The information is so easy to comprehend for a beginner looking to get involved in property investment. Keep up the great content, Michael." Well, thank you so much, Molly, for your kind words. I'd love to get other people's words. Lots of people have left. They're all 5-star reviews. That's great. And when you do, I'll read them out as well. Look forward to being in your ears next week.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect and pass on their wealth through strategic property advice. If you got value from listening to this podcast, please leave us a review and we'll read it out on a future show. Just go to michaelyardneypodcast.com/review and it will take you over to iTunes, where you can enter a review and let us know what you think. We'd really appreciate it. If you don't already subscribe on iTunes or on your Android phone, you'll find us there as Michael Yardney Podcast. If you'd like to gain instant access to the show notes or a transcript of the show, head across to michaelyardneypodcast.com. Watch out for our show next week. You'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success and money in around 20 minutes.